Hey, Howard, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining me here today for this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Kathryn. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Then I'm going to jump right in. And the first thing I want to talk about is a topic that I know that you've been following very, very closely, which has to do with privacy regulations. As many researchers know, if you do business in the EU, you have to be familiar with GDPR. And GDPR kind of gives all of the European countries that participate, I believe there's 27 countries that are participate in GDPR, sort of a unified framework for what privacy regulations need to be. And in the US, it's been more of a patchwork. Different states have different rules. And a lot of people point to California and CCPA as sort of the example of a particularly rigorous set of privacy regulations here in the United States. Now, I have heard that because of the state differences, that some research firms actually avoid doing research in certain states because they don't want to inadvertently run afoul of state-specific regulations. Is this something that you've encountered?
So I don't have reports of anybody, or at least evidence of anybody actually avoiding a specific state. The problem, as we've identified, there are 20 different states with comprehensive privacy laws now. They're not entirely all interchangeable, or a lot of them have different provisions here and there. It makes it very complicated. I know that early on, when California was originally getting ready to pass the California Consumer Privacy Act, some companies said, "Oh, well, we'll just avoid doing business. We'll avoid doing research in California," which was, of course, laughable. Come on, it's a massive state. You can't really do that. The problem is, though, once every other state started getting into the game, uh, there's no benefit really to avoiding a state once now 20 as of 2026 will be having their separate privacy laws. The only state in particular that I would single out where if I was a company, I would try to find a way to avoid doing research there is Washington State. Because Washington State has a comprehensive privacy law that they talk about it as a healthcare privacy law, but they were very good at defining healthcare personal information as pretty much everything that is personal information everywhere else. It's very expansive, and they have a private right of action. So private lawsuits, class actions, these are in store for people that go too far off the reservation in dealing with Washington State. So if I were to avoid a specific state, that would be my choice. Do I know of anybody that actually has? No. But yeah, I would imagine most companies don't talk about it if they are doing that sort of thing. But I mean, you can imagine that, if you maybe if you're further down the food chain, you might avoid choosing to pick up a contract that involves something specifically there, for example. But it's a hard thing to do to differentiate that way. It's a big country and people are all over the place, and most clients are, whether they're corporate or nonprofit, they want to know what's going on with consumers across the whole country.
Right, and that certainly makes sense. But your example from Washington State certainly would give people pause. I mean, the idea that it's not just a regulatory issue where you might get a slap on the wrist, but that people can actually sue your company if they have the sense that their information was disclosed or not used appropriately.
Yeah, well, in any of these states, the attorney general, the privacy authorities, various authorities within the state can seek damages against you when you do bad things, or when you do things badly, I guess, rather than doing bad things in most cases. But yeah, that when it comes to individualized lawsuits or class actions, yeah, that takes it to another painful level.
Okay, got it. And I would imagine even for privacy rules, obviously, like for example, companies that do survey research, they always have a privacy policy that documents how participants' information is used and protected. I got to imagine that keeping up those privacy policies to adhere to all the different states that have specific requirements, even just updating your privacy policy could become onerous.
It is complicated, but is definitely something that everybody needs to do. And one of the reasons we don't offer just a blanket privacy policy that we recommend to people to use is because it does need to be tailored to what you actually do within your business. And that can vary dramatically from company to company, even within our industry, which is, I mean, the insights industry is extremely diverse. And so the, those policies need to not just reflect what is demanded by given states, but it needs to really reflect what you're doing internally. And that is an ongoing challenge, but one that companies need to focus on.
And of course, now there's the discussion that maybe the United States will have a unified set of privacy regulations, which potentially could help. And that would potentially replace the state by state variability. Is this likely to happen? And if so, in what time frame do you think?
Well, we've been battling for it for a number of years now with a coalition called Privacy for America, and we have draft legislation that we have been offering to Congress. And they've had some fits and starts along the way, including the last couple Congresses where they put together legislation, including in 2024. There was legislation advancing in the House, and it recognized market research, but it didn't actually help us in any way. So what looked like it might be positive from the beginning was kind of a poison pill that would actually make it much more difficult to ever do market research and a lot of insights work. I think things are looking better right now within the House Energy and Commerce Committee. They have a privacy working group that is trying to formulate their own draft legislation, and they're taking some cues from some of the more reasonable state laws and trying to put together a package that actually works. Because I think recently there's been an attempt where everybody just makes this big grab bag full of junk and say, all right, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And sure, those two pieces don't fit together. And we say something over here that contradicts something over here. And so what? We're going to jam it through anyways. Uh, These guys are taking a more patient approach and trying to come up with a process that will work, something with which all of the businesses are able to comply, but that will actually provide protections for consumers and give them transparency and choices. And that's going to take a little while. I expect could have something, all right. The odds that it gets passed into law next year are not great. It's hard to pass anything into law at the moment with this Congress. Very thin margins between parties. And that's just not a recipe for this law happening right away. But certainly it's something that I could see moving along to the point where we're set up for passing a law by 2027.
Okay.
Which obviously does not make everybody happy right now, like because you still have to deal with the problems on the ground. But in the
Right.
meantime, you have confidence that we're working towards what should be a workable and preemptive privacy law to preempt that patchwork of state laws, because that was another failing along the way in some of the past few years as they've tried to craft a federal privacy law. They've tried to carve out, say, all right, well, we're going to preempt everybody except California. Or last year, well, everybody except Washington State, which would be disastrous. So it's all about give and take and trying to get the best compromise that'll work for everybody involved. And I think it is a good possibility. And once that's something that we can help get past, it would hopefully come into effect relatively quickly.
And can you give me an example of something that's like a sticking point?
Um, Sometimes it can be very simple things, but a lot of it is details and definitions. So, like last year, a sticking point was that the sponsors wanted to say, all right, market research is special, but only if it involves a complete opt-in, like an express opt-in for any use of personal information for market research, which would be great if you're running a panel, for example, because you've got 5 layers of opt-in all the time anyways. But for most other kinds of research, you're left hanging. And a sticking point has also been really the ability to track people across websites, even with an opt-in.
Mhm.
that might they've tried to find ways to cut that off. Because again, mostly they're focused on actual targeted advertising and personalized advertising. But in reality, they end up going after any uses of data and market research, audience measurement. We're all a part of that. So trying to fine tune how they approach things like that has been a big focus of ours.
Got it. Thank you. Those were two great examples. I really appreciate that. All right. So if we time travel a couple of years in the future and we do get some sort of, federal framework in place so that there's not patchwork across states, would that necessarily mean that that's all you have to worry about? Or would you still have to worry about now you've got to comply with the state level and the federal level?
Well, no, our end goal is to get rid of the patchwork. So there will still be other state laws on, and it's likely that some of the specific laws that deal with privacy for children, for example, those would presumably be carved out, and some other sectoral type privacy laws, those would still sometimes be handled at the state level. But sort of the overall majority would be strictly federal.
Okay.
And state, you might have to deal with your a local state attorney general, for example, as part of the enforcement of it, but those guys wouldn't be writing the rules. And that's the key thing is keeping the writing of the rules at the federal level in an orderly fashion, hopefully with the proper guardrails to keep the Federal Trade Commission focused on the important things rather than getting ahead of their skis.
Got it. All right. Excellent. Thank you. Then the next thing I'd like to talk to you about is rules about incentive caps. And this is obviously, I know, something that you've written about in the Fighting for You newsletter that the Insights Association puts out about your some of your work trying to make sure that these things are handled appropriately and not in a way that would damage us as a profession. But I know you've written about this idea of, right now there is a reporting threshold gap. That is, like, if I'm paying somebody incentives right now, if I'm paying people incentives to participate in research, I can't pay any individual person more than $600 a year. When did that cap originate, and how did $600 become the cap?
Yeah, so I had to go back and do the research because I didn't even know where it came from. But yeah, it dates back to the early 1900s. I think there are first references to this around the time of World War One, and when the then federal government was trying to raise revenue, and they set a reporting threshold of anything over at the time $1,000, as best I can tell, and then that was set. A little later, the reporting threshold was lowered to $800. And then finally, when it became a proper part of tax law for good, apparently until now, it was set at $600. Now, of course, $600 even back in the early 1900s was an insane amount of money. So they weren't really worried about capturing that much. They were, but it was designed to deal with independent contractors, which it still does, and which is why we care about it, because if a research insights company is paying someone to participate in a study, that person is an independent contractor rather than an employee of the company. It's a fun binary choice. So if they're an independent contractor, at a certain point, you hit that $600 threshold in overall for the year. You have to issue a 1099 form, either an NEC or an MISC, and you issue it to them and to the Internal Revenue Service. And when I started, I have funnily discovered that there were some companies that weren't issuing the forms because they thought other people were responsible for it. We helped clean that up, much to everybody's misery. But this has been really mostly a concern for high value audience. So because the average research subject is not going to be getting near even $600 in an average year. Uh, that because that's that's a lot of work for someone if you're at the low value end of the scale. But if you're an IT pro, if you're a healthcare professional, if you're a business executive, policy influencer is the category I fall under if I want to participate in research. The incentive levels are much higher. So a single study for one, specialty doctor oftentimes will put them over that $600 limit right away. But the good news is that in a weird and unexpected move, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the big tax and budget reconciliation law that passed in the summer, is it was raising the threshold. So where it has been $600 for many, many decades, this is finally going to be raised in 2026 to $2,000, and then it's going to be adjusted every year thereafter for inflation. And so again, unless you're dealing with, the serious high level attractive audience that requires serious lots of incentives, and they're doing maybe, more than a handful of studies, probably not going to have to worry about that IRS reporting threshold for a while for a lot of people. And I think that's going to make life a lot easier for a lot of folks in our industry because, for a lot of audiences, incentives are a key aspect of getting and retaining interest from a research subject population. And anything that reduces the bureaucratic paperwork on our end is a great benefit, but it also makes it more attractive to our research subjects to participate. If, obviously the impetus is on them to report their income rather than us. Uh, and, if they choose not to, that is their choice.
Right. And obviously, a lot of people, when they get a survey invitation and it's just 5, 10, $20, the last thing they're thinking about is, I'm going to have to report this income or I'm going to get a 1099. But at $2,000, gosh, even if I'm getting paid 20 bucks a shot for participating in research, that's the chance, am I going to participate in over 100 studies over the course of the
Probably
year?
not.
Probably not unless I'm a
And
professional researcher,
right.
a research.
And if you are that, you're probably spreading yourself around to multiple platforms and multiple companies, which would avoid the problem also.
Got it. So the benefit here then is both for the participant and the company. Obviously, companies would rather not have to issue a lot of 1099s.
Yeah. So that spares if someone chooses not to report it themselves, then they take that risk, but it also saves them a lot of paperwork.
Absolutely. So, it's interesting. So, talking about both of these things, talking about, privacy regulations and trying to get to a national consistency, talking about raising the cap, both of these things, while they're very different topics, do seem to point to this, the importance of kind of staying up with what's changing, what's likely to change, so that the business decision makers at research agencies, different types of research suppliers know that, hey, there's things coming soon that could have an impact on our costs or even our business processes.
Yeah, I think it's very important to keep abreast of all of this. I certainly, at the Insights Association, I'm doing my best to affect policy in the right direction, but also just to keep abreast of and keep our membership aware of what's going on. That, when things pass, whether positive or negative, at the moment, I am thoroughly immersed in going through the detritus out of the latest legislative sessions in California where we were successful in beating back lots of nasty things. But, there are also new and interesting laws that get passed there every year, little tweaks and expansions of their privacy law, but also some new AI reporting requirements and AI transparency requirements and weird protocols around chatbots. It, there's always they're a particular engine of interesting law every year. But for Insights Association members, we provide a monthly newsletter, which is available to the public as well, that summarizes what's been going on for the last month. It's called Fighting for You. And they're also, more or less every week, there's a post on LinkedIn giving a quick summary of what's been going on during that week. So there are various ways to keep tabs on what's going on beyond just entrusting it to me and turning a blind eye to it.
Right. No, thank you, Howard. And I love the work that you do. I think that it's so important and so valuable. Before I let you go, though, you did bring up AI, and I'm just curious, did you happen to catch the news item in the last couple of weeks about the fine that Deloitte has to pay to the government of Australia?
So I've heard, but I do not know the details of it, to be fair.
It's okay. So there have been obviously a number of articles about this, but I think this is something that for our membership is yet really important because it's probably the first really public example of a highly reputable company, right? A really well-known, reputable company. And they delivered a report to the government of Australia as part of a larger contract. And somebody went through that report and found obvious AI errors. And a couple of them were the really classic things, right? Like somebody was quoted in the report, but then when you check that person's information, it was like clearly that was not what they said, or that they were not the source of that quote. So misattribution of quotes, which we all know, is something that still happens. It doesn't happen as often as it used to, but it does still happen. And they did have to pay back some of the money for that contract, to kind of in restitution of, making the client feel whole about the experience. But the client caught that error. So, it's a real wake up call, I think, for those of us and anybody who's delivering reports, especially research reports, because, when you use AI to help you with writing, it does make errors. In fact, I was just talking to some researchers yesterday and sharing an example of how an AI tool had misinterpreted data from different columns in a table. So it thought that one column was about customer group A and one column was about customer group B, and it had actually referred to the wrong columns, even though they were labeled. And if you just read the text, you would have thought, okay, this is the result. You didn't catch it unless you actually checked the numbers to make sure they were being pulled from the right column.
Which, used to be a problem that was made by people.
Right. And so
But
we always checked people.
yeah,
Right.
unfortunately, double checks are they're a necessity whether you have AI or not. AI obviously requires its own separate eye on the product. Um, yeah, it's complicated, but I think one of the key things that we stress at the Insights Association is transparency in the use of the AI. It's and this is coming up now in state laws and will likely be federal law before too long.
Mm,
Is that a transparency to users when AI is being used, when they're interacting with an AI.
right.
Uh, so it's because of chatbots impersonating people and that causing strange and weird problems. Um, you know, Transparency is a key thing, but transparency of the use of AI is an important thing in on the business to business side as well. That your clients, your partners, they should know when you used AI to do something because that can change the equation. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But people need to know what tools you're using. That's just sort of a common sense approach, and you would use it and demand that sort of thing anyways. AI is not different. It should be treated somewhat the same way that should let people know when it's being used.
Great. I love that point. We've got to check the work, whether it's human or AI. We're responsible. Bottom line is we're responsible for what we deliver.
Correct.
And it is true. Like now we just have to have a slightly different process because how we do the checking is going to be different. Whether we're the producer and are checking before we submit something, or we're the client and we receive something. And now I know, okay, you've been transparent. You told me that you used AI for some of this analysis. That gives me some priorities in terms of how I'm going to check the work.
Exactly. Yeah, and look, and sometimes it's simple things. It's the spelling and grammar check now is done entirely by a relative rudimentary AI system. But you know what? They're not perfect. They're
Yeah.
just not. So a human eye is always can be helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Howard. This was a great conversation, and I love both of these topics, and I really look forward to seeing what happens with how some of these things evolve, especially getting to a national standard for privacy regulations. I think would be great.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it, and I will keep working hard on it and look forward to talking on these and other subjects again soon.
Excellent. Thanks, Howard.